Doctor, you, a great deal of your work, of course, are aware of the fact that in your early work, you were, to some, at least in association with Dr. Sigmund Freud. And I know it would be of great interest to many of us to hear a little bit about how you happened to hear of Dr. Freud and how you happened to become involved with some of his work and ideas.
Well, as a matter of fact, it was in the year 1900, in December, soon after Freud's book about dream interpretation had come out, that I was asked by my chief, Professor Bleuler, to give a review of the book. I studied the book very attentively, and I didn't understand many things in it, which weren't clear at all to me. But from other parts, I got the impression that this man really knew what he was talking about. And I thought that this is certainly a masterpiece, full of future.
Yes.
I had no idea then of ideas of my own. I was just it was just when I began my career as an assistant in the psychiatric clinic. And then I began with experimental psychology or psychopathology. I applied the experimental association method by Wood, and the same that has been applied in Krappelin's psychiatric clinic in Munich. And I had the results, and that there is a reaction, a certain reaction to a stimulus world. That is more or less uninteresting. But the interesting thing is why people could not react to certain stimulus worlds, or in an entirely inadequate way. And then I began to study these places in the experiment where the attention or the capability apparently of the test person began to waver or to disappear. And I found soon out that it is matter of intimate personal affairs people were thinking of, or which were in them, even if they momentarily did not think of them, when they were unconscious, with other words, that nevertheless an inhibition came from the unconscious and hindered the expression in speech.
Yes.
And then I, in examining all these cases as carefully as possible, I saw that it was matter of what Freud called repressions.
Yes.
I also saw what he meant by symbolization. And then I wrote a book about the psychology of dementia precox, it was called, now schizophrenia.
Yes.
And I sent the book to Freud and wrote to him about my association experiments and how they confirmed his theory thus far.
Yes.
And that is how it began, my friendship with Freud began.
Yes. Now, one of the, of course, very fundamental ideas in the original psychoanalytic theory was Freud's conception of the libido as sort of a broad psychic sexual energy.
Well, you see, in the beginning, I had naturally certain prejudices against his conceptions. And after a while, I overcame them. I could do that from owing to my biological training.
Yes.
And I could not deny the importance of the sexual instinct, you know.
Yes.
But later on, I saw that it was very one-sided. Because, you see, man is not only governed by the sex instinct, there are other instincts as well. For instance, in biology, you see, the nutritional instinct is just as important as the sex instinct. Also, in primitive societies, sexuality plays a role much smaller than food. Food is the all-important interest and desire.
Yeah.
Sex, that is something they can have everywhere. They are not shy. But the food is difficult to obtain, you see?
Yes, yes.
And so it is the main interest.
Yes.
And then in other societies, for instance, in civilized societies, the power drive plays a much greater role than sex.
Yes.
For instance, there are many big businessmen who are impotent even, because their whole energy is going into money making.
Yes.
Or dictating the laws to everybody else.
Yes.
That's much more interesting than affairs with women. So, you see, the inferior Dr. Adolf, the younger, the weaker, naturally had a power complex.
Yes.
He wanted to be the successful man. Freud was a successful man. He was on top, and so he was interested only in pleasure, in the pleasure principle, and while Adolf was interested in the power drive. Sure enough.
I see. In other words, you feel that it's sort of a function of his own personality to some degree.
Yeah, it is quite natural. You see, it is one of the two ways how to deal with reality. Either you make reality an object of your pleasure, if you are powerful enough already, or you make it an object of your desire to grab it.
Yes, yes.
Or to possess it.
Yes. Now, of course, some observers have thought that perhaps the patients that Dr. Freud saw in Vienna of this period were often individuals who were repressed sexually.
Oh, yes.
And then perhaps that so many of these patients having been of this type, that this may have been one thing that sort of reinforced Dr. Freud's ideas.
Well, that is certainly so, that in the end of the Victorian age, there was a reaction going over the whole world against the taboos, the sex taboos, as one call them. One didn't understand anymore properly why or why not. And Freud belongs into that time, a sort of liberation of the mind of such taboos. The research comes to the question of the unconscious. There things become necessarily blurred, because the unconscious is something which is really unconscious. And so you have no object, you see nothing.
No.
You only can make inferences, you know. And so we have to create a model of this possible structure of the unconscious, because we can't see it. Now, you see, he came to the concept of the unconscious chiefly on the basis of the same experience I had made in the association experiment, namely that people reacted. They said things, they did things without knowing that they did it or said it. And this is something you can observe experimentally in the association experiment, where people cannot remember afterwards what they did or what they said in the moment where a stimulus word hits the complex. With the reproduction, in the so-called reproduction experiment, you go through the whole list, and you will see that the memory fails where there was a complex reaction. And that is the simple fact Freud has based his idea of the unconscious on, because that is kind of what you can see time and again, that people, for instance, make a mistake in speech, or that they say something which they didn't mean to say, that just make ridiculous mistakes, you know. There are no end of stories, you know about how people can betray themselves by saying something they didn't mean to say at all, yet in the unconscious meant him to say that thing, just that thing. For instance, when you want to express your sympathy at a funeral, you go to somebody and you say, I congratulate you. You say, that's pretty painful, you know, but that happens, and it is true. Now, this is something that goes parallel now with the whole school of the Salpêtrière. in Paris. There was Pierre Janet, who has worked out that side of the unconscious reactions quite particularly.
Yes.
Now Freud refers very little to Pierre Janet. Well, I have studied with Pierre Janet in Paris,
yes.
and he has formed my ideas very much. He was a first-class observer, though he had no dynamic theory about, no psychological theory.
Yes.
It was a sort of physiological theory
Yes.
Of the unconscious phenomena as a so-called abaissement du niveau mental.
Yes.
That means a certain depotentiation of the tension of consciousness.
Yes.
It sinks below the level of consciousness and thus becomes unconscious.
Yes.
Now, that is Freud's view too.
Yes.
Only he says it sinks down because it is helped, it is repressed
Yes.
from above.
Yes. Yes.
Then that was my first point of difference with Freud.
Yes.
I say there are cases, in my observation, where there was no repression from above, but the thing itself withdrew.
Yes.
Those contents that became unconscious had withdrawn all by themselves.
Yes.
They were not repressed. On the contrary.
Yes. Yes.
They have a certain autonomy. There I discovered the concept of autonomy.
Yes.
And that these contents that disappear have the power to move independently from my will. Either they appear when I want to say something definite, they interfere and say and speak themselves instead of what I wanted to say.
Yes.
Or they make me do something which I didn't want to do at all. Or they withdraw in the moment where I want to use them.
Yes.
They certainly disappear.
Well, one of the most extreme views that we have, or one of the very men that you knew around Dr. Freud, we mentioned a moment ago, Otto Rank. He spoke
Yes.
of the birth trauma. He said the actual trauma of being born would leave a very powerful impact on the ego and show itself throughout the life of the person.
I should say this is very important for an ego, that it is born.
Yeah.
Otherwise it wouldn't be. And that is highly traumatic, you know,
Yes.
when you fall out of heaven.
But will you take literally Otto Rank's position of the birth trauma as having, you might say, a psychological effect?
Don't you see, this is an event that happens to everybody that exists, that once has been born. So everybody is born, has undergone that trauma, and so the word trauma has lost its meaning.
I see. So, in other
Because
words,
it is a general fact, of which you cannot say it is a trauma.
Yes.
It is just a fact.
yes, yes, I see.
You see, because then you cannot observe psychology that hasn't been born.
Yes.
Only then you could say what the birth trauma is.
Yeah.
And then, until then you cannot even speak of such a thing.
Yeah.
It's just a lack of epistemology.
Now, Dr. Jung, we've been talking about the early oral level, and as you pointed out, you want to look at it rather literally as sort of a hunger drive or a drive for nutrition. Now, another rather fundamental point in development of the ego, as the more or less orthodox psychoanalytic view follows, is that there is then, this is followed by another critical level, an anal level development.
Well, one can use such terminology because it is a fact that children are exceedingly interested in all orifices of the body and they are doing all sorts of disgusting things, you know.
Yeah.
And sometimes this such a peculiarity keeps on into later life, you know.
Yeah.
It is quite astonishing what you can hear in that respect. Now, it is equally true that people who have such preferences also develop a peculiar character. In early childhood, a character is already there. You see, the child is not born tabula rasa, as one assumes.
Yes.
The child is born as a high complexity.
Yes.
With existing determinants that never waver through the whole life, and that give the child his character already in the earliest childhood. A mother recognizes an individuality of her child, and so if you observe carefully, you see the tremendous difference even in very small children. And these peculiarities express themselves in every way. So first, the peculiarities express themselves in all childish activities, in the way how it plays, in the things it is interested in. There are children who are tremendously interested in all moving things, and in movement chiefly. All the things you see that affect the body. And so they are interested in what the eyes do, what the ears do, how far you can bore into the nose with your finger, you know. They will do the same with their anus. They will do with their whatever they please with their genitals, you know. These interests express themselves in a typically childish way in children, and later on they express themselves in other peculiarities, which are still the same, but it doesn't come from the fact that they once have done such and such a thing in childhood. It is the character that is doing it. There is a definite inherited complexity, and if you want to know something about possible reasons, you must go to the parents. So in any case of a child's neurosis, I go back to the parents and see what there is going on, you know, because children have no psychology of their own, literally taken. They are so much in the mental atmosphere of the parents, so much en participation mystique with the parents. They are imbued by the paternal or maternal atmosphere, and they express these influences in their childish way. So, for instance, a child, take for instance an illegitimate child, they are particularly exposed to environmental difficulties, for instance, the misfortune of the mother, etc., all the complications. And such a child will miss, for instance, a father. Now, in order to compensate for it, it is just as if we were choosing or nominating a part of their body for a father instead of the father, and they develop, for instance, masturbation. That is very often so with illegitimate children, that they become terribly autoerotic. Even criminal.
One of the central parts of the so-called psychosexual development in the more or less orthodox psychoanalytic theory is the so-called Oedipus complex. I believe the term complex was yours originally.
You see, that is just what I call an archetype. That is the first archetype Freud has discovered. The first and the only one. He thinks that this is the archetype. Of course, there are many such archetypes. You look at Greek mythology and you find any amount of them, or look at dreams and you find any amount of them. But incest was so impressive to him that he even has chosen the term Oedipus complex, because that was one of the outstanding examples of an incest complex. And it is only the masculine form, mind you, because women have an incest complex too, but there it is not an Oedipus. So it is something else. And so it is only the term for an archetypal way of behavior in case of a man's relation, say, to his mother. It also means to the daughter, because whatever he was to the mother, he will be it to the daughter too. It can be this way or that way. It depends.
So you look at, then you will accept, in other words, the Oedipus complex, but not in as being the only important such influence. You will see this is just one of many fundamental, one of many
ways of behavior. Now, see, the Oedipus gives you an excellent example of the behavior of an archetype. It is always the whole situation. There is a mother, there is a father, there is a son, there is a whole story, how such a situation develops, and to what end it leads finally.
Yes.
And that is an archetype. You see, an archetype always is a sort of abbreviated drama. Namely, it begins in such and such a way, it extends to such a complication, and it finds a solution in such a way. Yes. That is the usual form. As for instance, you take the instinct of building a nest with birds.
Yes.
In the way they build the nest, there is the beginning, the middle, and the end.
Yes.
It is built just to suffice for a certain number of young. So, you see, the end is already anticipated. And that's the reason why in the archetype itself there is no time. It is a timeless condition where beginning, middle, and end are just the same. They're all given in one.
Yes.
Now that is only a hint to what the archetype can do, you know,
yes.
But that's a complicated question. Well, you know what a behavior pattern is.
Yes.
Now, the way in which, say, a weaver bird builds its nest, that is an inherited form in him. He will apply all certain symbiotic phenomena between insects and plants. They are inherited patterns of behavior. And so man has, of course, an inherited scheme of functioning. You see, his liver and his heart and all his organs and his brain will always function in a certain way, following its pattern. We only have a great difficulty of seeing it because we cannot compare. There are no other similar beings like man that are articulate and could give account of their functioning. If that were the case, we would know, I don't know what. But because we have no means of comparison, we are necessarily unconscious about our own conditions. But it is quite certain that man is born with a certain functioning, a certain way of functioning, a certain pattern of behavior. And that is expressed in the form of archetypal images or archetypal forms. For instance, the way in which a man should behave is given by an archetype. Yeah. And therefore, you see, the primitives tell such stories. A great deal of education goes through storytelling.
Yes.
For instance, they call in a palaver of the young men and to older men, perform before the eyes of the younger all the things they should not do. Yeah. And at the end they say, now that is exactly the thing you shall not do. Another way is they tell them of all the things they should not do.
Yeah.
And you, like the Decalogue, yes. Thou shalt not.
Yes, yes.
And that is always supported by mythological tales.
Yes.
For instance, our ancestors have done so and so, and so you shall do.
Yes.
Or such a hero has done so and so,
yes.
And that is your model.
Yes.
For instance, take the teaching of the Catholic Church. There are several thousand saints,
yes.
And they show us how, you see,
they models and become
models,
for the individual.
And they have their legends, and that is Christian mythology.
Yes.
In Greek, you know, there was a Theseus, there was a Heracles, models of fine men, of gentlemen, you know.
Yes, yes.
And they teach us how to behave. They are archetypes.
I see.
Archetypes of behavior. So you see, when you have lived in under primitive circumstances, in the primeval forest, among primitive populations, then you know that phenomenon. You are seized with a certain spell, and then you do a thing that is unexpected. Now, see, the archetype is a force, it has an autonomy. It can suddenly seize you. It is like a seizure.
Yeah.
So, for instance, falling in love at first sight, that is such a case. You see, you have a certain image in yourself without knowing it of the woman, of the woman.
Yeah.
Now you see that girl, or at least a good imitation of your type.
Yeah.
And instantly you get a seizure, and you're gone.
Yeah.
And afterwards you may discover that it was a hell of a mistake. Or you see, a man is quite capable, he's intelligent enough to see that that woman of his choice, as one says, not no choice, he has been captured.
Yeah.
You know, he sees that she is no good at all, that she is a hell of a business. And he tells me so, and he said, for God's sake, doctor, help me to get rid of that woman. He can't. He's like clay in her fingers. And that is the archetype. That is so-called archetype of the anima.
Yes, yes.
He thinks it is all his soul. Well, you know, that is a bit complicated, you know. The anima is an archetype form expressing the fact that a man has a minority of feminine or female genes.
Yeah.
And that is something that doesn't disappear in him, that is constantly present, and it works as a female in a man. Therefore, already in the 16th century, the humanists have discovered that man has an anima.
I see. And
that each man carries his female with himself, they say it.
Yes. And so you
that
can't...
is not a modern invention.
Yes. So
now you see, the same is the case with the animus. That is a masculine image in a woman's mind, which is not sometimes quite conscious, sometimes it is not conscious, but it is called into life the moment that woman meets a man who says the right things.
I see.
And then because he said it is all true, and he is the fellow.
Yes.
No matter what he is.
Yes. So, to infer something...
Those are particularly well-founded archetypes, those two. And there you can lay hands on the basis, as it were, of the archetype. They are exceedingly well defined.
Well, Dr. Jung, we have been discussing in some detail some of the factors in the development of the personality of the individual, and you have very kindly elaborated for us on some of your fundamental concepts. I wonder if you would mind telling us a little bit about how you construe this term, persona.
Well, this is a practical concept we need in elucidating people's relation. I noticed with my patients, particularly with people that are in public life, that they have a certain way of presenting themselves. For instance, take the doctor. He has a certain way. For instance, he has good bedside manners, and he behaves as one expects a doctor behaves. He may even identify himself with it and believe that he is what he appears to be.
Yeah.
He must appear in a certain form, unless people don't believe that he is a doctor. And so when he's a professor, he's also supposed to behave in a certain way so that it is plausible that he is a professor, you know. So the persona is partially the result of the demands society has. And on the other side, it is a compromise with what one likes to be, or with what, or as one likes to appear, say.
Yes.
Take, for instance, a parson. He also has his particular manner, and as corresponding to the general expectation, and he behaves also in another way, combined with his persona that is forced upon him by society in such a way that also his fiction of himself, his idea about himself, is more or less portrayed or represented. So the persona is a certain complicated system of behavior which is partially dictated by society and partially dictated by the expectations or the wishes one nurses oneself.
Yes.
Now, this is not the real personality, in spite of the fact that people will assure you that that is all quite real and quite honest, yet it is not.
Yes.
Now, such a performance, or say, the performance of the persona is quite all right, as long as you know that you are not identical with the way in which you appear.
Yes.
But if you are unconscious of this fact, then you get into sometimes very disagreeable conflicts. Namely, people can't help noticing that at home, for instance, you are quite different from what you appear to be in public.
Yeah.
And people who don't know it stumble over it in the end. They deny that they are like that, but they are like that. They are it. And then you don't know, now, which is the real man?
Yes, yes.
Is he the man as he is at home or in intimate relations, or is he the man that appears in public? It is a question of Jekyll and Hyde.
Yes.
Often. Yeah. It is such occasionally there is such a difference that you would almost be able to speak of the double personality.
Yes.
And the more that is pronounced, the more people are neurotic.
Yes.
They get neurotic because they have two different ways. They contradict themselves all the time, and in as much as they are unconscious of themselves, they don't know it. They think they're all one. Everybody sees that there are two.
Yeah.
And some know him only from one side, so others know him only from the other side. And then there are situations that clash, because the way you are creates certain situations with people in relations, and these two situations don't chime in. They are just dissonances.
Yes, yes.
And the more that is the case, the more the people are neurotic.
Now, you also use the term self.
Yes.
Now, the word self, then, would this have a different meaning than, say, ego or
Oh, yes,
persona?
quite, oh, yes. You see, when I say self, then you must not think of I myself, because that is only your empirical self, and that is covered by the term ego.
Ego, yes.
But when it is matter of the self, then it is matter of a personality that is more complete than the ego, because the ego is only consists of what you are conscious of.
Yes, yes. Your awareness.
What you know to be yourself. Yes. The whole personality of man is indescribable.
Yes.
His consciousness can be described. His unconscious cannot be described, because the unconscious, as I must repeat myself, is always unconscious.
Yes.
And it is really unconscious. It really does not know it.
Does not know about it.
And so we don't know our unconscious personality. We have hints. We have certain ideas, but we don't know it really. Nobody can say where man ends. That is the beauty of it, you know. Yeah. It's very interesting. Yeah. The unconscious of man can reach God knows where. There we are going to make discoveries.
Yes, yes. Now, another set of ideas center around the terms introversion and extroversion.
It's simply practical because there are certain people who definitely are more influenced by their surroundings than by their own intentions. While there are other people who are more influenced by the subjective factor. Now you see, the subjective factor, that's very characteristic, was understood by Freud as a sort of pathological autoerotism.
Yes, yes.
Now this is a mistake. We have, the psyche has two conditions, two important conditions. The one is the environmental influence,
yes.
And the other is the given fact of the psyche as it is born. The psyche is by no means tabula rasa. We are a definite mixture and combination of genes, and they are there from the very first moment of our life. And they give a definite character, even to the little child. And that is a subjective factor, looked at from the outside. Now, if you look at it from the inside,
yes,
then it is just so as if you would observe the world.
Yes.
When you observe the world, you see people, you see houses, you see the sky, you see tangible objects. But when you observe yourself within, you see moving images.
Yes.
A world of images.
Yes.
Generally known as fantasies.
Fantasies.
Yet these fantasies are facts. It is a fact that a man has such and such a fantasy. And it is such a tangible fact, for instance, that when a man has a certain fantasy, another man may lose his life.
Yes.
Or a bridge is built.
Yes.
These houses were all fantasies.
Yes.
Everything you do here, all of the
right.
houses, everything was fantasy to begin with. And fantasy has a proper reality. That is not to be forgotten. Fantasy is not nothing. It is, of course, not a tangible object, but it is a fact, nevertheless. It is, a form of energy.
Yes.
Despite the fact we can't measure it.
Yes.
It is a manifestation of something.
Yes.
And that is a reality. That is just a reality as, for instance, the peace treaty of Versailles or something like that.
Yes.
It is no more. You can't show it.
Yes.
But it has been a fact.
Yes. Yes.
And so the psychical events are facts, are realities. And when you observe the stream of images within, you observe an aspect of the world.
Yes.
Of the world within. Because the psyche, if you understand it as a phenomenon that takes place in so-called living bodies, then it is a quality of matter. As our body consists of matter, we discover that this matter has another aspect, namely a psychic aspect.
Yes. Yes.
And so it is simply the world from within, seen from within.
Yes.
It is just as if we were seeing into another aspect of matter. And so, you see, the man who is going by the external world, by the influences of the external world, say society or perceptions, sense perceptions, thinks that